So good afternoon. Yeah, we apologize for the delay, but we are now ready to start. And our side event is on how to turn the agri-food sector into an engine of job growth of Africa's youth, with organizers as Professor Oluwole Fatumbi. We are used to calling him Ole, that's why. And also Dr. Heike Baumula. And really the questions we want to address today is, what are the key challenges faced by young agripreneurs in Africa? How effective are current youth employment policies in Africa? Will mechanization and digitalization in agro-processing create or replace jobs? How can we achieve a better match between the supply of and demand for skills in the agri-food sector? So I believe with the panel discussion and our speakers for this afternoon, we are going to get some answers even as we begin. And so I'll go straight to the key presentations, starting with Professor Ole of FARA on strengthening agripreneurs, who is from FARA. So welcome, Wole, to give your presentation so that we can just get started and save on time, because already we've lost almost 25, 30 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much. Can you put on the presentation? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you. The subject matter for this side event is really very, very important. Okay, and I'm so sure many others will join us, and it's going to contribute significantly to the key output of this event. I want to pitch my presentation from this. Okay, this did not have any. I want to pitch my presentation from this side: strengthening youth agripreneur for sustainable agrarian livelihood. And I carefully selected, carefully crafted this title. So every word in it strongly have a meaning. I want to look at agrarian livelihood as one. I want to look at how can we strengthening the youth. And that suggests to you that my thinking is that the youth seems to be weak at the moment. Then getting them to get strength from agripreneurship. The other word is sustainable agrarian livelihood. So all the keywords in my title, they have certain meaning in what I want to present briefly. And it's just like overview and a few research report. So the central thought is, how do we structure the agricultural sector to generate lucrative jobs and livelihood for the bulging youth population? Yeah, the tendency is we have this thinking that agriculture is the only thing that Africa have, and that is the truth. If a sector, if a sector engages more than 60% of the population, yeah, that means that is where 60% of the population, that is where 60% of economic activities are going. Then that sector is quite important. And we see agriculture as a pivot that can drive economic development in Africa. Same way, we see agriculture as an instrument we can use to resolve many social problems on the continent. So Africa must get it right with its agriculture. The data I pitched here, the data I pitched here were just to show the population of youths in agriculture over time. Let me move on to say that you need to understand youths in Africa if you want to provide any solution to the problem. And if you don't understand them, the likelihood to continue to do the type of things we are doing now, or we've been doing in the last decade, that did not translate into any meaningful change we will just continue to do it. I think you need to know that 63% as at year 2022, youth population is 63%. That's the continental average. In some population, you see it a bit less, and in some others, you see it a bit more. I think there are about 5 or 6 countries where they are tending to 69 or 70% of the population. And well, we are likely to see this as a negative or a positive. Now, I have asked myself this big question: is this youth population a blessing or a curse? But when I research this across the globe, I discover that we are not having precedence of this. Asia was here more than 2 decades ago. Even China was at this point. I think I have a data to actually do that. So Africa is least prepared for this youth population because we are not learning from other culture, and we are not learning from history, or neither are we using foresight to project and prepare for eventualities on the continent. Then upsurge in technologies does not match the upsurge in technology is actually reducing labor issues. So when you look at labor in Africa, you see that many youths are there. We have believed in Africa that education is the key to a good life. So we go to school, and education should be able to give you a job. So you see many youths get education. Our education system does not prepare people for entrepreneurship. It prepares them to apply, get a job, and be part of a salary system. That's it. So now that the salary spaces are fully occupied, many of the youth are confused about what to do, where to do. And so they resulted into dangerous immigration. And you know the statistics of that is really very heavy. And you see many of them also pick up many jobs that does not align with their qualification. Okay, and they were doing that, you know, these motorbike riders in most of our city. You see the youth there. Then others, they move into crime, they move into terrorism. I tell you, there's a study that showed clearly that the reason why terrorism keeps increasing is because those youths, they did not find livelihood in any other thing. So they are less busy, and so they are ready to risk anything just to survive, and they fuel terrorism. By and large, we call this unproductive life for the youths. You know, in our PARI study between year 2020 and 2022, we carry out series of studies around the structure of the youth, the nature of the youth, and how agriculture can help provide solution. I mean, social solution to these problems of the youth, but more importantly, from the employment point of view. So the title of the study is How to Engage Youth, How to Enhance Youth Engagement in Productive Employment in Farming and Agribusiness in Africa. And we take the perspective of the youths. Of course, we just oppose it with the perspective of the civil society. But we understand that the youths, they know better what they feel, how they feel, and why agriculture will work for them or why it will not work for the youth. So we did that. The 3 research questions we set in this study is, what are the success factors for youth in farming and agribusiness? Success factor. The second one is, what are the main barriers to entry into farming and agribusiness for the youths? And which policy interventions are most relevant to support youth in farming and agribusiness? Now, you begin to see that I use the word agribusiness and I use the word farming. These two, they are different, but they have a tiny dividing line. Agriculture is broad. There are many components in agriculture. Agribusiness fitting into agriculture, that is doing agriculture as a business. But farming is the small component that has to do with feed production, and it is the primary enclave in agriculture. In other words, there are several other subsystems within agriculture that relates with farming. Now, farming is just the primary production, just to explain that. So we observe that the youths are strongly disinterested in agriculture in the first place as a whole sector, okay? And there are several reasons for that. And then, you know, if you look at that, that they are disinterested, possibly because they have that feeling that agriculture is difficult, agriculture is dirty. There's this filth notion around agriculture. So they don't want to do it. And that results into several things. But with government effort and the civil society effort over the years, you understand that a few youths venture into the neat part of agriculture. And many of them are into ICT, a number moving into processing, and a number moving into marketing. I mean, marketing one side and fintech. That's what the youth call it now. That is using ICT base for money exchange and all those things. And you know, they do a bit of rent seeking around that and get some good amount of money. You know, the implication of the components that the little population of youth that pitching in agriculture, the implication of the component of the work they pitch is that it actually, those components did not require large number of individuals. I mean, we should ask ourselves questions. How many apps are we going to release to meet how many people? Possibly we don't need more than 1 or 2 apps. But if 300 youths are busy learning how to develop app and all of them are developing app, who uses it? I have discovered now that there are so many applications. In fact, the effort in developing application is so low. In fact, you need 300% of the effort in developing an app to find people to use your app. So there are so many apps that no one is using. The same thing with processing. I mean, one processor can actually service up to 300 farmers. So how many processors do we actually need? The same way, how many people do we need in marketing of the product? One marketer can actually be an aggregator for 1,000 farmers, and you know, and so on and so forth. So youths are interested where the labor force is not so much required. So there is this acute shortage of farm labor. Farm labor means people who will actually engage in farming as the primary enclave for agricultural development. We discovered that. And what this is leading to is fewer people on the farm. I think the statistics shows now that the average age of farmers on the field is 55. You know, the range is 55 to 60, but it's 55. You find age, suggesting that in the next 10 to 15 years, there will be a lot of problem if effort is not given into getting the youths to embrace farming or make farming attractive and reduce the filth that is associated with it or the labor that is associated with farming. So they say no to farming. And you know, the reason why youth will not do this is not because farming is laborious. Another study showed us clearly that youths will like to be farmers, provided we ensure that farming as a component of agriculture can yield sustainable income. If their take-home pay from farming can actually take them home. Now, to get good income from farming, I call it profitable farming, is simply capital intensive. And I'm going to show you some of our statistics. So let's go to our research question. The first research question is, what are the success factors for youth in farming and agribusiness? Number one, they want access to land and extension services, because many of them study something else in school, not agriculture. But the few that even studied agriculture, did they have access to do practical training? Yeah, possibly in most of the curriculum, out of the 5 years they spend in school, they spend 1 year to go to the farm and to do a bit of practical training, which I think is suboptimal. Then knowledge of the agricultural sector and availability of support initiative. And distinguished ladies and gentlemen, you know what? Profitable agriculture is knowledge intensive. And so it is not a naive sector. Profitable farming is knowledge intensive, and you need to know it and be taught. Then they need a lot of entrepreneurial training because they will get into farming and they will have to compete with the peasant, smallholder farmers who is not doing it at business, so whatever he gets is satisfied with it. So they need to understand business, agribusiness, entrepreneurial. Then they need access to affordable finance. And I keep saying that access to finance is not as important as understanding money and knowing how to manage money. Then they need access to input and output market, which is a structural problem in many parts of Africa. Access to input, fertilizer, agrochemicals, and other input. And if you want to go agroecology, organic agriculture, access to the bit of organic inputs that you may need. But more importantly is access to output market that brings profitability. Maybe I will have opportunity to just explain what market is. So those are the things we discover from question 1 of our study. Then question 2, what are the main barriers to entry into farming and agribusiness as youth? There are barriers, and I've mentioned a bit of them. Now, there is this unstructured business environment for agricultural product. It's not structured. And let me express a sentiment I learned over decades of being in the sector. Most of the commodities that are produced, they are seasonal. And everybody gets it out into the market during the harvest season. And that's subject to the basic rules of economics, the forces of demand and supply. The supply is now very high, the price goes down. And those law does not respect the cost of production. So because there is more supply in the market, the price goes down. And so the youth that is doing it as business is at risk. And there are no infrastructure for storage, for processing, for him to withdraw supply into the market. You get it, for many of these commodities. So he will be forced to sell it at a loss. Now, I call it a structural problem because this is supposed to be a policy issue. You get, I'll still talk about that. Then there is this high risk character of farming and value chain. Yeah, it's risky. There is poor governmental protection of the producers. Nobody produces them. You are simply on your own, and the youths are not going to take that. Then market inconsistency. I mean, due to the cost of production locally or uncompetitive cost of production at the local market compared to when it is imported. There are statistics on that for every commodity. I remember that the cost of production of 1 ton of wheat, okay, in Nigeria then was around $350 for 1 ton, okay? And the cost of bringing in the wheat up to delivery to the factory when you import from the United States of America was around $200 and something. So the millers actually prefer to import than to buy locally the wheat that is produced locally. So I call it competitiveness in terms of price. They also complain then about competitiveness in terms of quality, making net return for the producers to be so low. So then the other issue around poor infrastructure like irrigation facilities, storage, warehousing, road network, all of these things we not say don't produce, but they increase your cost of production at the end of the day. And so even when you make financial incentives, you make funds as loan available for young farmers, young agripreneurs, they are unable to pay back. And when they get into this trouble, they just do the japa thing. You know what japa is? You just migrate quietly to Europe. and then, recovery rate for the loan becomes very low for the government. We discovered this from our research. Now, we now ask the question for that. What could be the core motivations? The core motivations, I tend to think about using problem tree analysis to do the thing. It could be quantitative and it could be qualitative, but let me just express this. Now, consequences of this is youth now have strong disinterest because he has borrowed, he got into debt, not because he did not use best business model, but because of the structural problem that is existing that is beyond his control. So then you see widespread unemployment, then upsurge in antisocial behavior. Now, the main problem now is poor access to land. He does not have it. I mean, all through yesterday and today, we've been talking about farming system transition, agroecology, and all those stuff. Now, if you don't have your own land, you cannot invest. You just mine the land and leave it for the owner, then simply walk away. You get it? That's a major problem. Then poor extension, lack of finance, lack of structured training, poor infrastructure, shortage of farm labor, and all those things. And what is the cause of all these things is unprofitability. Unprofitability results from unstructured approach to our agriculture. So looking at this with the lens of a problem tree, often what we take as the problem is just the consequence of the problem. The real problem lies in the roots. You get it? Using problem tree analysis methodology. The real problem lies in the root, unprofitability of farming. And there are several things that makes that happen. Even basic development economics showed us clearly that returns, labor productivity is least on the farm. And so more developed economy, they try as much as possible to reduce labor on the farm by using machineries, using economies of scale, and they move the labor into the industrial sector where returns from labor is higher. But here it is not there. And so it is difficult. That's the cause of the root of the problem. You should do it. You should, and it requires policy and infrastructural development so that youth can make profit from it, then automatically it will address all the other problems that you see in the trunk and in the foliage of the tree. Yes, I love to use this illustration. I developed it from some set of data. Okay. Now, what are the drivers of profitability? I discovered that I use I don't have a pointer, sorry. The black stuff there is just represent the traditional practices. And I discovered that productivity, which we think will bring profitability, is a major precursor of profitability, we believe, but that is not the whole truth. But we think that productivity could come from maximizing biological advantage. That is, if you use the best variety or the best breed of the animal, whatever researcher gives to you, or it could also come from chemical advantage. That is, you use agrochemical, you use fertilizer and co, then you can gain more and deterioration increase. Then you can do mechanical advantage. That is, instead of using manual labor to do land tilling and all those things, you use machine, and you can save money and save time. And the last one is economies of scale. Now, when I put this data together, I begin to see, if you look at the statistics here, it's just percentage benefit. I begin to see that the best of the biological advantage, best variety, breed, biological system that gives you is just 15% of the total margin you could get in productivity. The same way, when you look at a chemical advantage, that's the yellow portion, it gives you also 13 to 15 chemical advantage when you spray with agrochemicals, when you even apply fertilizer. I mean, that's a discussion for another forum, not youth employment. But we know, my brother here may speak to that. We know that a return from the use of fertilizer at the moment is still very suboptimal in Africa because you need a bit of knowledge to be able to do that. Then mechanical advantage using tractors and all those things, harvesters and shakers, also only give you about 10 or less than 10 advantage. What gives you more than 40% of the productivity, total productivity, is economies of scale. That is not doing smallholder system, but doing it large. And that comes up, I mean, with this this illustration that I put together from my data, suggesting that we're not going to give up on biological advantage, mechanical advantage, chemical advantage, but we must give a lot of attention to production at scale. Production at scale, I mean, net return per unit investment in agriculture is still small, but when it is at scale, it gathers together and it gives you livelihood compliant income. And this is what our studies show that we should do, youth should do. Then the third question, which policy interventions are the most relevant to support youth in farming and agribusiness? Number one is policy, and this is really very important. Policies to structure agricultural business environment for profitability. And I think that is the most important. It must be structured for profitability. I had opportunity personally to study agricultural development in Brazil, and I saw that. I had opportunity to understudy the one in China, and I saw a bit of that. I had opportunity to do that one in Thailand and in India, because those are recent areas that were low before, and they were now high. And I discovered that policy that structured profitability was principal in what they do. I can't read. Okay, so the first thing under that is to structure commodity pricing out of the forces of demand and supply. I mentioned that. You must structure it. I mean, this is not new knowledge anyway in Africa. I mean, in some of the countries that were in the forefront of this, they have commodity boards. And the commodity boards compute every year what should be the minimum price, maybe for a kilogram of maize. And they would have computed it based on the cost of labor, cost of other inputs and all those stuff. And they bring it out as a law that no one should buy 1 kilogram of maize below this price. It can be higher, so that the smallholder farmers that are producing maize can at least have a livelihood margin. You know, the second one is policies to facilitate agricultural production at scale. And that is important because all statistics is pointing to the fact that if you don't do it at scale, then you cannot get livelihood compliant income. So it needs to be big. But what that is saying is you need to have access to land, is that you need to have access to capital, you need to be trained. Now, land is a major problem that is delimiting this in Africa. So then access to information, and this is also very important. But I'm not seeing doing this as rocket science or an impossible endeavor. What it requires is policy, and intentional policy, and following up with the policy to ensure that land is made available for youths who want to engage in agriculture and to give them. We conducted a study many years ago, more than 2 decades ago, to see that what is the minimum size of land that can give a single person minimum wage. And we discovered that that person must cultivate 5 hectares. 5 hectares. So how many farmers have 5 hectares? No, hardly. They have 1 or 2 acres. So they are gardeners. You get it? They cannot get, even when they do multiple crops, they cannot get it there. And so you cannot ask the youth to do this. They would rather prefer to go into mining. And I tell you, mining is more difficult than agriculture. But the day he finds one diamond, he knows that he will become a millionaire. So he will stay there 7 years, 8 years. I mean, struggling. But in agriculture, he puts it there, and the risk factor also can debar him. I'm sorry that I'm telling the truth, or you just want me to say political things? Yeah. So, so this is it. Then supportive policy to manage the importation of food and agricultural commodities. And this is really very important. Now, if the policy in the country makes it open, you are importing from countries where they are doing agriculture at scale. And so the cost of production per unit item is really very low, and they can come in, but you are not competitive price-wise and quality-wise. So they bring it in, you can't compete in the market. And youths are not going to embrace that. Then the development and maintenance of infrastructure for agricultural business. I'm closing now. So I started talking about action to strengthen agribusiness. Good policies, I mean, putting the enablers together. Then do industrial agriculture. That's what I call at scale education and entrepreneurship. So you need to support mechanization, a bit to provide them training within TVET, we did comprehensive study within PARI study on this, do business support, research support, create affordable financing and fair foreign trade policy. And I want to say that that is what we actually engage the youth effectively as business farmers or agripreneur. I just want to use this to illustrate further the pricing of agricultural commodity, but I think I have talked strongly about that, not need to re-emphasize. So what are the policies and institutional consideration from our study? We need to address market and intracontinental, intra-country market and the intercontinental market access. We need to liberalize it. Then we need to work on land issues. Then we need to structure agricultural commodity pricing. If there's any discussion I'd like to engage is on structuring agricultural commodity pricing, because it's the pivot that we make the business environment open, and every youth will prefer it rather than the, unreliable and mining endeavor. Mechanization, digitalization, and technology input is there. I wouldn't know why anyone will be averse to technology, and we want Africa agriculture to be driven by naive model. I tell you, none of this youth is going to accept that from you. Today, they just want to use drone, to do application of agrochemicals. They want to use drone to scan through and know where insects eat and apply. And they want to use artificial intelligence. They want to use fintech. They don't want to carry cash. You get it? They even want to use robotics to do the weeding on the farm, because youths are not going to get into farming where there is drudgery. And this I think is what where policy and the investment should go into. You get it? Research also should go into this so that we have it. Then bring technologies and beneficial practices to scale. Yeah, I want to thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Wole, for that very enlightening presentation, which has helped us really to understand the issues of profitability are so key for the youths to be able to take up farming and agriculture. I like the graph he gave on drivers of profitability. I liked that so much. Yes, I really appreciate it. It's very good. And of course, the policy interventions. Let us give him another round of applause to appreciate him and to appreciate that very good work they did in PARI. Our next speaker is Dr. Heike Baumula from ZEF, and she'll be speaking on employment opportunities in the agro-processing sector. Welcome, Heike.
Thank you, and good afternoon. Thank you. Yeah, I want to move up the value chain a little. I want to talk about, we had a very excellent presentation on farming and agribusiness and farming. I want to move up and look at processing, because in the long run, if we want to create all these jobs that we're talking about creating, we will have to create them also up the value chain. So what are some of the research questions that we are interested in? So first of all, we want to know what are the job opportunities in agro-processing at the moment, at this moment in time, especially for women. How does mechanization and automation, so the modernization of agro-processing, how is that changing jobs? And what skills are missing to modernize the agro-processing sector, to introduce mechanization and automation technologies? But also, how important are skill gaps in comparison with other obstacles to promoting the agri-food sector? So we started off with this research with a sort of a scoping exercise. We did some research in Ethiopia, Ghana, and Tunisia, just to understand in general what is the potential of the agro-processing sector. So what we find is that, yes, the number is still small, but it's growing fast. And it actually makes up a fairly large size of manufacturing jobs. We also see that agro-processing is labor intensive, among the highest in manufacturing, and it has high employment elasticity. What that means is that with output growth, you also get job growth, because an industry will only help you if you get job growth with output growth. It's not the same in all African countries, but in those three, that's the case. We have a high share of female workers. We have a lot of backward and forward linkages. So we're not just talking about processing, we're talking about production and also retail, logistics, other sectors. And we looked mainly at formal firms, but if you include informal firms, then the job potential is even much higher. So then we wanted to understand a bit more. We actually realized there's no data on agro-processing, on jobs in agro-processing, even on the agro-processing sector. So we had to start quite basic. We started by putting together a list of agro-processing companies in these 4 countries. We had to start somewhere. So it's Kenya, Ethiopia, Nigeria, and South Africa, just to understand what is the sector like in the first place. So this is formal companies. We also have research on informal companies in Ethiopia, but I'm focusing on this one now. So first of all, so what is the structure? What is the sector like? So we find that in all countries, you have all types of industries. You have small, you have medium, you have large industries. There's a slight difference in the distribution. So you have more medium-sized companies in Nigeria, more smaller ones in Ethiopia, but you do have all sizes in all countries. Most of it is food processing, but also especially in Nigeria, you have also a sizable share of beverage processing. And what we also found interesting is that most of the companies are domestic private companies. It's not foreign companies coming in, apart from Nigeria, where we have a larger share, but it's not really foreign companies coming in, setting up businesses. No, it's domestic processing companies that are operating across all sizes. We also wanted to find out, so how modern is the sector? We didn't know, we had no data. What is the use of machinery? What is the use of automation? And when we say automation, we mean computer controlled production systems. So where you have actual production lines that are managed through computer systems. So this is what sometimes is also called Industry 4.0. Because it's often said that African industry, it's backward. There's no Industry 4.0, it's not mechanized, it's all by hand. It's actually not true. We found that in those 4 countries, almost all companies used some form of machinery, and almost half of them used some form of automation. It's different across countries. You have a much lower share in Ethiopia, you have a much higher share in Kenya, for example. So it's not universal, but you do find these technologies throughout. So we found that very encouraging. It's throughout the production process as well. In particular automation, but also mechanization. So everywhere you find the technologies. So what does that mean for employment? First of all, what sorts of people, what sorts of jobs are there in agro-processing? Is it just low-skilled jobs? What is the distribution? So what we find is that about half of the jobs we would classify as low-skilled jobs. But there are also about a quarter that are medium-skilled jobs, so clerical workers, operators of machinery, and you also have about a quarter that's high-skilled. So we see that in agro-processing, you have very diverse job opportunities. We also wanted to know, where are the women in agro-processing? Which jobs do they have? And the interesting color here, this is a lot of detail, it's all in the papers that we've published, so I'm just focusing on the takeaways. The interesting color here is the dark green for a start, because this is what shows where the share of women is particularly low. So we see women are really missing in the technical professions. They're not technicians, they're not operators of machinery. Where we see women is in clerical support, in office work. And encouragingly, we see a reasonable share actually also amongst the higher skilled laborers. But here we see the big gaps where we are missing opportunities for bringing in more women into some of the other professions. We also wanted to see, so what difference does it make if I mechanize or automate my production? Because there's always this concern, if I bring in mechanization, I'm losing jobs because the machines will replace the workers. But the argument also goes, if I bring in machines, I can increase output, I can grow my business, I'm actually generating jobs. So we wanted to find out, so what is actually the case? And we find that the impacts are a little different. So amongst the mechanized companies, what sticks out is the gray area. So the gray area is really no change. So since the last major investment in machinery, most companies didn't actually change. And Where it did change, most of the time they increased as a result. Automated companies are a little different, but what we see, or at least it seems, that automation leads to increases in medium and high skilled jobs. It leads to increases of some low skilled jobs, but it also leads to decreases of low skilled jobs. So this is where we need to focus a lot of policy attention, is on low skilled labor in automated companies. But for the whole, on the whole, we find that in fact companies didn't really lay off workers so much, they just reassigned them to different tasks with the introduction of machinery. So what skills are missing? That's another thing we often hear. The skills are missing in Africa to use machinery, to have automation systems, you know? And to some extent that's true, but the most interesting number I find on this slide is the fact that 2/3 of companies didn't actually mention skill gaps. They didn't list any, they didn't say we are missing these skills. So in fact, most companies were quite happy with their staff. But where we do see missing skills, it's around technical skills, computer skills, machinery skills. That's really the types of skills you also learn in vocational training, in engineering school, computer science. This is what we need. But what we also need, and this is in fact in line with international experiences, is soft skills when we move into Industry 4.0. So you need team experience, you need leadership capacities, you need innovative attitudes if you want to move into Industry 4.0. How important are skill gaps? Is that really what's holding up agro-processing, what's holding up modernization of the sector? To some extent it is, but what is really holding up the sector is machinery related. And power failures across all 4 countries, that was by far the biggest concern, is just stability of power. But you also have issues around hardware malfunction and unavailability of spare parts. So you see that issues around the machinery itself and the use of the machinery is actually much a bigger concern than the introduction of the skills you're lacking. There's just one where you really see a difference between mechanization and automation, that's resistance to adoption among staff. So this is something that companies struggle with. If they introduce these new modern technologies, these computer controlled systems that are really quite different from machines, this is when you start getting some resistance. So just to summarize, getting out of all this data, the policy recommendations that we took out of this is that we do anticipate job growth in agro-processing, but it's not automatic. It does need policy support to make sure that we can capitalize on employment opportunities. So one is a simple one, as we need to upgrade infrastructure, access to power, access to road transportation. And this is, we heard a lot about the agro-industrial parks this morning. This is really going to address some of these concerns. We also need to invest much more in technical skills, but also in soft skills if we really want to modernize. You need to provide lifelong learning opportunities because technologies are changing all the time. And to make sure that your workforce can actually capitalize on these opportunities and not be replaced by more skilled jobs, laborers, you need to continue to offer training. We need to definitely bring more women into the technical professions. There's a big gap there. There's a whole part of the labor force out there that could fill the skill gaps that are out there. But there's also about the quality of job, and this goes in line what you were saying. You need to make it attractive. It's just not the number of jobs, but it's also how good the jobs are. And you need to look beyond processing to think about how can I really link this then, as Wole was saying, so we don't import the raw material from outside because it's cheaper, but rather how can we then link agro-processing to production, link it to retail, link it to marketing and to exports. So see agro-processing as part of the entire food and agricultural system. And you can find these studies that have been published already. So if you're curious about some of the countries as well, if they are your countries, you'll find them disaggregated by country. So you can find out a bit more what the sector looks like specifically in the 4 countries. And we have a lot more research. Also the research that Wole was talking about, it's all available on our website. You can find country studies and cross-country studies there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much, Heike, for another very good presentation. And I think you can now sort of tie them together and see how it really flows, because I think the question has always been mechanization. Mechanization, are we going to lose jobs? Because a lot of mechanization is fought in many places, even tea. We had quite a big fight even in Kenya, rejection of mechanization. But she has explained it very well. It's not really a matter of losing jobs. And so we want to, I know you may have questions, but I want you to hold on to your questions because we have a high level panel discussion, which may even answer some of your questions, or maybe you might have other questions. But I want you to hold on to them as I invite Wale to come and take over the panel discussion. But first, I want to read your profile.
I'm just going to introduce the person.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yes.
A round of applause for Dr. Felista. Thank you. Thank you, Mami, for doing a good job. Time is on our side. We're doing very well with time, but time is also not on our side because this is an important subject that we need to discuss and interrogate. So I want to encourage everyone to come on. Yeah, to do the facilitation of the panel discussion, we have a veteran in the field. It's been around for too long, for a very long time. Well, he's not tired there. He keeps giving. It's from Ohio State University in the United States, after working for many years in Africa, and is now a professor, Professor Igodon. Yeah, a round of applause for God.
I think I'll take yours.
Yeah, yes, this is
Yeah.
better.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Wale. And good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, I have a slight cold, so I'm going to make this very quick to get myself out of this cold. Thank you for the Thank you to the speakers for a great job this afternoon. And to answer the questions that we have posed for them, I'm going to now invite all of them to, two of them, I think, to take the seats here. Please, if you want to do that, Dr. Anthony Chupoto. He comes to us from Zambia, Ndaba Agricultural Policy Research Institute. Yeah. Dr. Mlanga, is she here? Yeah. Thank you, please. He comes to us from United Nations FAO, Agribusiness Officer. Mr. Sivisile Kangi, sorry for your name, the project manager for the Sorority Institute here in South Africa. And Ms. Amanda Namayi, Agra, thank you so much. Definitely last but not the least is Mr. Kofi Akwaye, Africa Regional Coordinator here at PARA. Thank you.
Well, Prof, you can sit down if you wish.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that would be good for me. Thank you so much. I'm going to begin with taking into cognizance some of these speakers this afternoon, also what they presented, and just have that in front of you in terms of how you think through some of the questions, also in terms of your reflections, and so forth and so forth. So the engagement is going to continue in that direction. We don't have much time. So let me get that together first in terms of timing. We have to get out of here by 4 o'clock because there's another group coming here. So please don't take too long to provide a response to some of the questions that I provide for you now. I'm going to start with you, Anthony. Thank you. You come from the Policy Research Institute, and you've been there for some time. And over the course of the last 2 days, we've heard a lot about many of the things, the gaps in Africa, and so the policies. You also listened this afternoon to Dr. Wallace's presentation in terms of some of the issues. And Dr. Wallace's presentation, I've heard about this presentation, many of the things that he said many years, and the problems are still there.
Still there. That's
you know,
Africa.
I just get worried. I'm almost bowing out, and the problems are still there. So how do we, Dr. Anthony, how do we deal using policy to tackle some of those issues that he talked about, so that we can find a futurable foresight in the direction that we are going, especially for the youth population?
No, thank you very much. I think maybe let me start from this angle. When you don't have lights in your house, what do you call? Do you go call a plumber or you call an electrician? You call an electrician, all right? To come to study the problem, to fix your lights. If you call a plumber, your lights are not going to be fixed. And that's the problem that we have been having in the continent, is that the research has unpackaged the issues that are facing us in terms of youth employment and the opportunities and the challenges that we face. But in terms of implementation, we have not moved an inch. So what really lacks, I think, is implementation. We know the problems. Maybe let me tackle. I know, you see, when we talk about agriculture, we forget that it's a value chain from production up to the table. And from the studies that have been out there, the youth are not interested in primary production. Not at all. Oh, they are, but it's only a few of them. But there are whole loads of opportunities along the value chain. So when we talk of financing, we have to contextualize it into the perspective of maybe financing agripreneurs. But what kind of agripreneurs? These are the future agripreneurs who are the youth, because as a future, I think Wale showed you some of those graphs that the future is young for Africa, basically. So it's important whenever we talk of shortcomings in, say, financing, we should not just say, think of financing in primary production. We should think of, okay, if it is wheat, for example, we have to think about wheat along the whole value chain. If we unlock production, for example, we might have problems because the marketing might be an issue. So hence you need to unlock financing into marketing. You may also have a problem in terms of marketing if you need to unlock financing in agro-processing of that particular product. So it's important to have, to view the agricultural sector with this lens that it's a value chain. And that's very important. And then we need to put in place policies and regulations that support the growth and development of that value chain. But that's where we have not been. We've just been talking about it. One solution, I think, in terms of unlocking employment for the youth is probably having a deliberate effort to have youth funds. Let's have public funds every year that go towards supporting youth and youth agripreneurship. That's very important. I think another sleeping giant that we have not been talking about has to do with climate finance. I spoke at the Sakao Congress recently. When you talk to the agripreneurs, whether their enterprises, are they climate smart? Some of them don't even know whatever they are doing can unlock resources, because there is some climate funding that is out there that can finance their activities, both for growth and development. So we need to, as researchers also, we need to make sure that we are providing the solutions, or the recommendations should be very specific how to get there. Because if you say there is limited financing and not provide how the financing can be unlocked, that means you need bankers, you need venture capitalists in a room and talk about how do we close this gap. And that's where the solutions will come. But if you send a researcher like me, you'll find that you will not have the lighting in your house because you've called a plumber instead of an electrician. I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to come back to you to think about it. Once we have a little bit of time to give us a success story that you have encountered during the course of your work in Zambia. Whether you have any success stories that you can share. You know, not everything is in the dark cloud. There's always a silver lining. So we want to be able to see that we can take away some success stories, you know, in spite of the so many things that are handicaps or roadblocks that youths encounter during the course of what you are given. Thank you so much, Dr. Chipoto. Let me ask you, Dr. Nomatemba. You know, right now, you're an agribusiness officer. You work with United Nations FAO. You're on top there. And FAO, it's been there for a very long time, and it has responsibility to the entire world. And your role is to create jobs in the agri sector. You know, so along the value chain that Anthony was talking about. So we need to move beyond farming. That's always the issue. You know, where do you see the greatest employment opportunities for youths along that value chain that Dr. Anthony was talking about?
Thank you very much. And building on what the previous speakers have said, indeed, farming is only one segment of the value chain. And therefore, if we are to create more employment opportunities for youth, we need to move beyond that and look into other segments. And there are many opportunities. We normally think about a value chain from its narrow perspective, but there are also services that can be provided to value chain actors. So there are opportunities that are linked to provision of services. For instance, we have a number of youth that are already providing, for instance, services such as mechanization hire services. So they are not farming themselves, but they're actually making sure that they have the skills to be able to do that. There was also mentioned that in the presentation that there are skills that are lacking when it comes to the technical part. When a farmer procures, for instance, machinery such as a tractor or a combine harvester, most of the time they have to really struggle to find a repair for those services. And these are the skills that when youth, even those that have gone to TVET services, can acquire those skills and then be able to provide such services. But within the value chain as well, I won't repeat what Aike said about the agro-processing sector, but we have logistics moving or connecting areas of high production to those that to the markets. And that's a role where we see some of the role, and they call them runners. I think colleagues here who live in Kenya know this model, that nowadays we have young people that are able to move agricultural produce from where it's produced to the consumers. And they're able to do that, and that creates sources of employment for them. So really, in terms of, there's no one segment where, and it depends on the country where, you know, in the value chain, which is being, which we're looking at. But definitely what we've done at FAO to really help practitioners that support youth in this space is to provide guidelines on how they can analyze different value chains. So we have youth sensitive value chains where there's a mapping of where the youth can actually find opportunities, and in the process be able to contribute to transformation of agriculture on agri-food systems. Maybe also the other thing that I want to touch on is on the issue of use of digital technologies. Many youth understand this easy, and they can actually provide these services to the value chain from different areas, even from urban areas where they prefer to be, but they are contributing towards the agri-food system. I'll stop here for now.
Okay, I
Thank
won't
you.
let you stop there. I'm going to ask you more questions.
Okay.
Okay. Dr. Chipote talked about the value chain and the primary role in, at the very beginning. He talked about the production part of it, the value chain, and he said the youths are not interested in that. The youths are probably looking for decent employment, if you like, or decent opportunities within that value chain, if you like. I want to ask you, as the FAO officer, seeking to support the creation of that employment in the African agri-food sector, how would you characterize the use of the word decent? Because that's what the youths are looking for, something that is attractive, something that will bring resources to them. How would you characterize the word decent? It's not by wearing the tie the way I'm wearing. What are you going to do to bring about that kind of job?
Yes, so we have a definition. I had actually prepared a slide on it, but for the sake of time, it's okay. I can just quickly go through it. We have looked at 6 dimensions of decent employment. And the first aspect of that is employment. So it's about the quality, not the quantity of the job. You can have, a heavy job. So in terms of decent employment, it has to adhere to the International Labour Organization conventions, meaning that it's not child labor. So we are not encouraging very young people that are supposed to be going to school to really be toiling the soil and or participating in activities that prevent them from participating in other activities for their growth. Then the other thing is that it needs to yield a decent income, or let me say a living income for the youth. So it's not about a salary that is very low, and that's where here we work with national institutions, particularly the ministries of agriculture and labor, to really set the standards on what it means to have a living income in agriculture. Because in most sectors, we have minimum wages, right? Which really determines what it is that one should be paid to be in a sector. Because it doesn't make sense to not get enough from what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. So that's other aspects. And then there's the other aspects too, which is it has to be a job that adheres also to occupational safety and health measures. So for instance, now of course there's moving away from the use of pesticide and insecticides, but we saw that a lot of people that have engaged in agriculture previously end up with health issues because what they're doing is not considered decent employment. And then the other aspect, which is related to the skills development part, is that decent employment gives access to some form of capacity building through through access to either tertiary education or on job learning. So I'll stop here in terms of the definition, and then allow me to share what we're doing as an organization in terms of promoting decent employment in agri-food systems. We're looking.
Hang on to that first. Hang on to that. I'll come back to you.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. The Sereti Institute in South Africa, Mr. Sibisile, you are the project manager, so that's a big task. That's a heavy portfolio. You run that institute, so you are responsible, therefore, in supporting and setting up agribusiness, the kinds of things that Nomatemba is talking about, in terms to move the kids away, the youths away to decent employment. You want to be able to give them so they can get satisfied. So help us understand how the kind of skills that you would say are the most important to enable the youth set up and scale up their business.
Okay, thank you, Prof, for the question. I would like to first thank the previous presenters for the great insights. Fortunately, it's what I've been reading around, because as Sereti Institute, we are working with youth. There is a program that mainly focuses on job creation. It's called Social Employment Fund. So we are busy with that program currently. So as we've been implementing this program around South Africa in 6 provinces, so there are sets of skills that we have seen that these ones are the most critical one, especially for young people. But before I explain more on those skills, I do want to mention that one other thing that as implementers and also the funders that we are forgetting to pay more attention on is attitude and also the perception. I like that Prof. Wale mentioned the perception, because that's one thing that we tend to ignore. The attitude of the youth towards the agribusinesses and also their perception. So if we can first try to sort of tailor or to tailor like whatever projects that we are implementing towards first changing the attitude and the perception of the youth when it comes to agribusinesses. So there are many things that affect the attitude and perception, of which we're not going to dwell much on that. So coming to the sets of skills, I was very much excited when Dr. Heika mentioned the soft skills, because we have 2 sets of skills that we really need to emphasize when it comes to youth. We have soft skills and also we have technical skills. So we tend to mostly focus on technical skills. So I won't dwell much on the technical skills, because youth, I'm sure majority of them, they are aware about the technical skills when it comes to agribusinesses. But the ones that I want to elucidate on today is the soft skills, of which the most important one first is the problem solving and also the problem solving and decision making. That's the most important one, because let's say if you're recruiting someone to the agribusiness space, they need to first identify the problem. They don't just go to the field and say, okay, no, I want to establish this agribusiness, They first need to identify the problem, so that they know what is the gap and what they want to do, and also they make a decision from there. And then the second one would be networking and collaboration. So before you introduce yourself into a business, you first need to network with the people who have been into this business. You collaborate with them so that you can be able to know the dynamics and also the aspects of the sector as the whole. And then another skill that we tend to mostly focus when we are into the business is the business and also the financial management, business and financial management. So we get to learn about that one when we are into the business, not before we can even start. So that's one thing we also need to look at. And then like as previous speakers have already explained about technology. So that's one thing that we need to emphasize, because we know how youth are fascinated when it comes to technology. So we need to put more emphasis on that skill. So those are the most critical skills that we need to emphasize on in order for the youth to set up and scale up their agribusinesses. Let's not focus more on technical skills. Let's also put emphasis when it comes to the soft skills, because every business, for it to be successful, it's dependent on your interpersonal skills first before you can even apply your technical skills into the business.
Excellent.
Thank you
so much. I think you have combined the presentation of Heidi and also Professor Wale in terms of what both of them said. He spoke a lot about networking. Heidi spoke a lot about the attitude also. Problem solving. So you also talked about problem solving. So problem solving, attitude, as well as the technical skill of technology. So kids are good. I listened to the plenary, I think it was yesterday or so, there was a young lady from FinTech. You were talking about FinTech, also from Zambia. I think she was in the plenary, the main plenary. She spoke a lot about that. So technology is not longer the issue, especially with social media and hands-on opportunity. In Nigeria, for example, you'll be amazed at the level of kid knowledge of technology, the youth knowledge of technology, I'm sure, across the African zone. So I think we are moving very fast in that area. But in the other areas, we have a lot of gaps. And I think we need to deal with that. I would like to ask you later on, Sivisile, the area of organic farming, but hang on to that if we have time, because that's an area that youths are interested in because they can package quickly. There is an export market for it. You can make money outside of the country. And today's food, in terms of the nutrition habits and so on, is very palatable when you talk about organic food. So organic farming is another area. So I want to ask you something about that later on, but let me move on quickly to Amanda here, Ms. Namaya, right? You work for Agra. Agra is a big name in Kenya, across Africa. And you work in particular with young agri-food entrepreneurs. This is a big one because it's just not producing the food, it's developing a market around it and ensuring that the youths themselves need to be able to help their businesses thrive in the African and international markets. Help us understand how the challenges that you have faced within the concept of entrepreneurship, faced with how you can turn this around in order to make a positive gain for the youths who you are involved with. If you have small stories, I think that would just tell us a good one, and you don't have to go into great details.
All right, thank you for that. And as a precursor, Dr. Wole had mentioned that the title of his presentation, each and every aspect was well thought into and handcrafted. And I'd like to say the panel here is also very well sequenced because my predecessors have spoken about the challenges, and I'd like to talk about what we are doing to address that. Much has been said about those who are not interested in agriculture, but now I'd like to talk about those young people who are in the sector. So to give more context, I'm Go-Getters lead at Generation Africa. And Generation Africa is looking at the current generation of youth. Oftentimes, and as you've heard, the youth are spoken about futuristic. They're tomorrow, but remember, tomorrow they won't be youth. We'll be dealing with the children who will be the youth of tomorrow. But right now, who are the young people in the agriculture sector and how can we help them? And I'll just touch on some of the challenges mentioned and how we are addressing that. I'll start with Sile. He mentioned about networking, which is very true. Oftentimes, there are many youth in the agri sector, but they feel that, oh, who else is in this sector with me? And we provide this community platform called the Go-Getters. And Go-Getters is a moniker that we use to refer to young entrepreneurs in Africa in agriculture. And within this network, they're able to reach out to fellow peers and peer-to-peer learning, mentorship, and coaching as well. And also we do run innovation challenges, and this is some of the ways we can get to have grants disbursed to these young people, and as a way to acknowledge and award the innovation that goes into some of their creations because they are not known. And within these innovation challenges, we also get to learn number one, who these youth are. Number two, the kind of solutions that they are providing. So we look at the solution and how do we scale it up from there. So we're not just giving an award or a prize money, but we're seeing how do we scale you up? Because when we look at the kind of scope that the youth are handling, it's very critical, but the scale is very small. So they're not able to grab the attention of partners like those who are in this room. So their scale is very small, very minuscule, and hence we come in and say, how do we scale you up? And then some of the challenges we saw as well, as mentioned by my previous panelists and Sile, we look at business coaching, and also Dr. Wole mentioned about that entrepreneurial training. there's a lot of skills, but how do they do business as a business person? So you may be a great producer, you may be the excellent software developer, but how do you do business? How do you negotiate contracts? How do you source for markets? And we have what we call a fellowship program where we provide business coaching for them. And we also partnered with the University of Utah, where they have a special program they call the Masters in Business Creation, which is purely for entrepreneurs. So we also are able to facilitate some of these youth to go and enhance their business skills through such programs. So, so these are just some of these initiatives. And when we look at the lack of knowledge, not necessarily technical skills, when we look at AFCTA, we realize that there's a huge gap in how are we able to pull these young people for them to have critical mass, for them to negotiate prices, for them to have the attention of governments, not to lobby and say we want to be heard or we want to be given a seat at the table, but with a value proposition that if we're looking at economic blocks, maybe from West Africa, we could say we could have a percentage of maybe cocoa exports to be from youth farmers, for example. So we have to build up the advocacy skills as well, so that when we support them to go to fora like these and others, it's not necessarily carrying a banner and say we want youth at the table, but they're coming with a value proposition. So I'll give some of those examples, and also as we get into the discussions, but I do have a few more, but I'll pause there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Namaya. Thank you. Mr. Kofi, yes, it's your turn now. Right. You sit at the Africa Regional Coordinator of YAPAD, which is based in PARA. You are the host of this meeting in Ghana. As APAD coordinator, help us understand how a large network of young professionals such as that could be engaged in a full system of agricultural development, interacting with youth within the network, and also how the current policies, some of the policies that Dr. Anthony talked about, in particular with rural areas, how would such policies be targeted in order to be able to, he talked about policies, and when the policies are not there, there's always a problem. Or if you have policies that are there and they are not followed, there's always an issue. Help us, give to us a sort of an eye opener on how you have been able to get those people aligned with those policies for success.
Thank you very much. YPAD is a network of youth in agriculture and agribusiness, everything related to it. And our youth are involved in various aspects of it. Some are extension officers, research, some are into education, communications, and production, etc. What we do is we facilitate discussions among the youth where we get to understand their situation. We run discussion forums which actually bring to bear the youth's perspective on agriculture. And with this, we believe would inform policies, like this would give evidence-based solutions based on the youth who are on the ground, concerning what their expectations are, and then how these policies, they believe, will benefit them. So when it comes to the policies that the youth usually propose, we see an example with Tunisia, where we have the Startup Act. This Startup Act that the government has put together allows for youth to register their businesses with even tax exemptions. This is really good because for young people who are starting businesses, they do not have that much capital to start a business and then keep paying tax on the side. Because, our sector is kind of, it's uncertain at times. and this requires that you enter with a lot of caution. So as a young person starting a business, young people, we get nervous about whether or not it's going to succeed, especially in the face of climate change and all the various challenges that there are. But our network comes together to also help us re-strategize and then know what policy inputs that we would make. We give an opportunity to youth to advocate for a suitable environment that will support business. Yes. So those are some of the very few things. But then through also experience capitalization activities that we have carried out with FARA, our host, we have been able to gather the perspectives of the youth and get to know that job satisfaction is really what the youth are looking for. Because you realize for every sector, when a job application is sent, you send your skills, and then you are supposed to function at that role. But without the skill you get there, you'll be found wanting. And that's the exact situation that we find with the agri sector. So we need a lot of skills. And through our network, we've been able to gather this information from the youth to find out what skills they need, which has to, the skills they need are actually, like my brother said, we have the technical and the soft skills. And then broadly, the challenges also that we've been able to gather through our connections is that the challenges may be intrinsic or extrinsic. So after giving them the skill, it really matters what is happening in the environment of the youth. And that has to do with policy and even the perception that the society has about agriculture. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I'm going to give the plenary one or two people to ask questions, if there's any burning questions there, based on what you have heard from the panel this afternoon. Anyone craving to ask a question? Yes, the microphone for you. Okay, there's one. Yeah. Thank you.
Very interesting, and thank you all for giving us these more ideas. But I also just like to say, in terms of the education curriculum that we are receiving right from the childhood, I think it also needs to be reviewed. And especially, we're talking of the millennium now generation, I don't know, X. I'm no longer youth. I looked out of that bracket, but you could find now children don't know even where the egg is coming from. They ask you, what type of green is this? Is broccoli? How is it grown? It's not like during our childhood where we'd go in the gardens. I think even the curriculum that we have probably is not even making the children that we're growing seeing that agriculture is not attractive. So I think it also bears in our education curriculum, it needs to be reviewed. I really like what Kofi said, the startups, the interest-free startups. I don't know if we're talking of advocacy. Have you tried to see that you influence the governments or your national governments to see that the youth really are accessing these interest-free? Because even the banks are saying the youth are risks to invest into. So that's one thing.
That's an excellent question. Would anyone like to take it up here? Okay.
I think Namanda will also, but I just wanted to say that's a very interesting question and observation that you made. So in some of our programs, we are following what is called the 4-H clubs, which introduces agriculture to children in primary school, for them to be able to have, and nowadays we have this innovation on vertical gardens, and they're exposed to that, and they can grow vegetables which can then be used for them to sustain them. If it's in a boarding school, for instance, it can contribute towards their meals, and then they get to know through a fun way where their food is coming from. So I think that's a very important point that you've made. And what we need is actually scaling up such initiatives whereby this is mainstreamed, not only at the primary, but also at the secondary and also moving forward. Because then once there's an interest at the earlier stage, it's likely to have more people in agriculture. And following on that, if you allow me, Chair, I just wanted to say, I appreciate the comments that have been made about, well, we call it farming. Let me put it as primary production, not being attractive to youth. But I think one of the things, and building on what other panelists have said, is about mindset change. Because when we also perpetuate this notion, it means that we are not making people proud, our youth proud of growing the food that they consume. And there are many youth that we've encountered, for instance, in mushroom production and all that, that are actually realizing by seeing others that actually there is value in participating in that segment of the value chain as well. And I think that's where we need to also bring them along to see that. And also farming is not all about also debt, because now we have, even like when it comes to promoting aquaculture and all that, and feed becomes an issue. And youth can be producing, like we have a project with Isipe on black soldier flies, which then are used as an ingredient for the feed for the fish. So I think once we have this broader perspective of agri-food systems, and not only about debt, getting your hands dirty, then we have more youth doing interesting things. And I also wanted to just touch on one other thing about agro-processing, that it also, and nowadays, because of also the nutrition aspects and health living, when people hear agro-processing, most of the time they think it's, this highly processed food, but we like to term it value addition. Youth can participate in adding value to agricultural products. And this is where you find that a tomato coming from a farm, in most of our settings, will sell for as little as, I don't know how many cents, but then you buy a tomato in a retail shop in the US or in Europe, it actually earns more than $1, which is what we need for, living out of, to be food secure. So it's also mindset change even among us, the practitioners and policymakers, to broaden this thinking about agriculture as a whole. And then lastly, agriculture, not only crops, there's livestock, there's you can get it from forestry products. And I just mentioned the fisheries, where it really doesn't also require a lot of land, because, once we think about constraints, and most people think, okay, land is the issue, but they can go into other segments using what they have and actually prosper in the sector. Over to you, Chief.
Excellent. Namaya?
All right, thank you. So some of the initiatives similar to what Dr. Nomatemba had mentioned is working with the school agriculture clubs. So some of our youth entrepreneurs have these vertical gardens that they then go to the schools, and then the children then through their agricultural clubs are able to tend to this vertical garden. So they're upskills, they're shown how to do it, and it's framed in a fun way. And I do agree that even the education system as it was before, for like in the context of Kenya, where punishment was very heavy, it used to be go and dig in the farm. So you see those perceptions over time have made it seem like that's not what to do. My father is a farmer and he wanted the best for me, and in his mind is be anything else but don't be a farmer like me. So I think over time, as we are coming round and with stakeholders like ourselves coming together, and also we've had discussions with FAO to draw to your second question about the risk and how partners can come in to de-risk or either share the risk to help them bolster some of these youth to get the required capital. We also had what we call the deal room. Again, we are still having that ongoing discussion. You can see there's some of those few gaps where you see the ticket sizes are very large, and the capacity of the SME to absorb that is very low. So how do we come in with the business development service to make sure this SME goes through the pipeline, and how we can also mitigate or share that risk to make sure that they are, according to how you name it, some are bankable or what you'd call investor ready, and how they can absorb more investment or blend the financing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I promised Dr. Chipote that I was going to come back to him to give me a success story. I hope you have not slept over that. So I'm going to give it to you now. 1 minute.
Yeah, I have to run at 4. I have another meeting. So, but of course, success stories are plenty. I mean, I've been talking to a lot of youth. Some of them are into reducing waste through solar. What is this? It's called Baridi, I think it's in Kenya. It's very interesting concept, and these are youth innovating, creating jobs, and they are also innovating to try to see how best they can scale up their investments. But I want to tackle the big issues here. I'm more into policy, so that's why I want to say, you see, when you look at investments, we often talk of the urban youth, the rural youth. There are several issues that we need to address. I always think of the last mile investments. We talk of ICT. You said ICT. But if I drive 40 Ks out of town, I don't have network. So how is the ICT going to work? If I have mobile money, it is fintech things. But I go to where the market is, I can't access. So you find that there's some last mile public investments that can facilitate job creation, agripreneurship. That's very important. I mean, we talk about risk. I mean, there are a lot of de-risking tools that we need to think about. I mean, agriculture in its nature is risky. Anything that is risky pays, but however, we don't tap into that. But we need to look at these de-risking tools for the youth to be able to invest, because you see, it's only the youth that can employ the youth. If, I mean, anecdotally, some of the studies we have done is that those who are no longer youth, who have companies, they don't want to employ youth, because they say youth are very mobile. Youth want good paying jobs, and so you find that they run away. So they are employing the older generation. It's youth who can employ youth. So we need the youth to be able to create employment for their counterparts. So some of the de-risking tools, we want guarantees from public sector. I mean, they can also do joint ventures. We could look at incentives from the government. I mean, they talked about incentives, tax breaks. It's very important, interest-free loans, because if you go for the commercial loans, you find that it's very difficult for you to finance your business. There are 2 types of financing that I think we need. Working capital, which you can finance with a high interest loan, it's fine. But for capital investments, you need very low interest, because that's for development. But we don't usually differentiate the two. We need low interest loans for the youth to be able to capitalize. I think, and also crowdfunding, but there's so many things that I can talk about.
Thank you so much. I know Sibisila is eager to speak. We are just 30 seconds. 30 seconds.
You did not ask the question.
30 seconds, random.
Oh, randomly. Sorry. Okay, one thing I wanted to touch on earlier before the previous speaker was on the initiatives to groom the young ones from an early age is nutrition education. So that is one of the initiatives that we currently are implementing now around the provinces where we are working is nutrition education. So I think another thing that I wanted to touch on is the organic farming. I think that was gonna be your upcoming question, like you said. So when it comes to organic farming, we may all know that this one is sort of a controversial topic, because if you consider the agroecology and then you check the agribusiness like as the whole, you will find out that in agribusiness, what you do, you maximize profit, you maximize production, to maximize profit. But now, if you go back to agroecology, the main concern there is environmental issues, of which if you now go to the field practical, you'll find out that when it comes to agroecology or when it comes to organic farming, the maximization of the profit is not the main issue. And also, with the environment and also with the technical challenges, when you are practicing organic farming, there are many challenges that are involved there, which prevent you from maximizing your profit or maximizing your production. Of which I don't want us to ignore the fact that everyone is interested in healthy food, in sustainable food. I don't want us to ignore that. For everyone, I believe in this house, they do want healthy food. And also I've read many articles that the demand for organic food is increasing. For instance, in the European countries, the demand has increased. For instance, the value for the organic food has now increased to 120 billion US dollars. So that tells us that there is a high demand when it comes to organic food. And also, if the African farmers can take advantage of that and adopt these agroecological practices, even if they start in small scales and then increase, and the intention must be to export so that they can generate more profit for themselves. But also in doing so, we should not ignore the fact that there are some challenges that are involved in doing so, of which they affect the value chain. For instance, if now the production has decreased, it means the supply is going to decrease, of which it affects the whole supply chain. So those are the basic, or those are the most things that we need to consider when transitioning the African farmers to agroecology. So we must consider that there are those factors.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Our time is up. Please join me to appreciate what they have done this afternoon.